I am not a medical doctor. I'm not a medical anything. All of my education, training, certifications, etc., are all in the humanities, social science. Doctorate? Yeah, I have a doctorate. It's in religious studies. I once was a full time minister. You may see old videos or things that I've written, even my earlier books, that have my doctorate or DR title. But understand, always, 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 it was never intended to imply in any way that I am a medical doctor. Hi, I'm Jason Stanley, a social research scientist focusing on field research and clinical trials on obesity. I'm here to help you understand that unrelenting urge to eat when you're not hungry and way, way, way past when you're full. We call that urge the food monster. I personally struggled with yo yo overweight and obesity for decades. I've been where you are now. My job here is to help you understand and heal your food monster. Now, since I'm not a medical doctor, why should you listen to me? Well, you have to get into the way back machine and go all the way back to 1979 when I first did the original field research with obese women. Now, I put together a program for interviewing deep life interviews with obese women, and I went out and did something that was unheard of. I actually listened to obese people. Wow, novel. In that study, there were 54 women in that original program. I learned some amazing things. I learned what doesn't matter. Diet. That's right. Diet did not have any correlations. When I say diet, I'm talking about hardcore, really strict vegans, all the way to junk food junkies and everything in between. And there was no connection, no correlation between what people ate and the size of their obesity, the duration, how long they had been obese. There just was no correlation at all. So diet clearly didn't matter. Exercise, nope. Again, no correlation. Some of the people in the program were graduate students. One of them was a long distant runner, and she ran at least 5 miles every day. Several of them were gym enthusiasts. They worked out, multiple times a week. Many of them were in secretarial type of work where they sat at a desk and did zero exercise, and that leads us into lifestyle. Well, back to the graduate students. Many of them stayed up late at night, cramming for tests and doing their research, etc. Where back to the secretaries, they had regular, stable, sedentary lifestyles. So again, no connection or correlation between the way these people lived and their chronicity or severity of their obesity. So we learned things that were really different because those are the things I went out looking for. But one thing I did find that was a surprise and was consistent with 100% of the people who were in that field study. Now, one thing, and by the way, it has held consistent through all of the research over the last 4 decades, is that every one of these women, while children, had the situation where they were always happy or comforted or maybe even loved while eating. It didn't matter if their life was pretty good or horribly stressful. They had that same thing. They were always comfortable, and they felt confident while they were eating. They felt accepted by their parents or their caregivers. And that was the one thing that was different that we learned. Now, understanding this, I hypothesized. I knew that this was the case. Then I hypothesized, well, golly, if all of these people have this and they are all eating when they say they don't want to, and they've all gained the weight back several times, There's got to be something in the subconscious mind that is driving them to eat. Okay, well, what unfortunately at that time, all of the psychology professors, the psychologists and psychiatrists that I talked to, everyone agreed that the brain was a brick. Meaning, that was the term, the brain was a brick, meaning that once you are through adolescence and the brain has kind of settled, there was no changing. There was no changing the subconscious mind. It was absolutely set for life. Well, okay. So I went ahead and wrote up my research and gave it to my professors and actually published a couple of articles in the local newspaper. But that was the end of it, because even though I understood what caused it, there was nothing you could do about it. Move forward from 1980, when I published everything, to 2000. Well, the culture had shifted. There were quite a few things going on in the American culture at that time. Things that you would hear were change your thinking, change your life. Affirmations could repattern your deep-seated, even subconscious beliefs. Reparent yourself for your own mental health. And hypnotherapy became very, very popular. So, with this kind of conversation and popular belief of how the brain could be changed, I dug in. I got into all of the self-help. I read books. I went to lectures, everything I could get my hands on, and I formulated what seemed to make sense about how to repattern your subconscious mind. I wrote the book. Here it is, 250 pages. And then, unfortunately, I wrote the book first, and then I did the, the clinical trial. Oh my goodness, I wished I had done them first, taken all my ideas and done the clinical trial, because unfortunately, the clinical trial was an absolute failure. It did not work. Okay, well, so much for that. And I moved on. Later, I moved to Asia. While in Asia, I continued my research by interviewing people about their childhood experiences and their eating habits. And these were all obese people. While very rare, they were there. So I interviewed the Vietnamese in Vietnam. I interviewed Cambodians in Cambodia and Thais in Thailand. Now, what was fascinating is that in all of those cultures, which are each unique and very, very different, the same factors about childhood eating, being happy and comfortable, and they were accepted and felt accepted by their parents while eating. That was the same factors that we saw in the American culture in my earlier research 20 something years earlier. While still living in Asia, in 2006, I discovered the therapy process called EFT, or Emotional Freedom Technique, colloquially known as tapping. So you're tapping on the meridian points, which are the meridian points known in acupuncture and acupressure, the Chinese medical system. I got so excited because I felt this makes sense. You see, EFT, the whole thing is to repattern deeply submerged emotional blocks. That's the whole idea. And now, because it's in the meridian system, it's hard to replicate, but they were having pretty good successes with a lot of trauma and a lot of emotional blocks. So I got real excited. I rewrote the book. Yeah, this time I published this one in 2007. And it's, again, a real book. It's got 350 pages. It's got diagrams and all kinds of good stuff in there. And I rewrote it and literally moved back to the United States to conduct the clinical trial. Again, I wished that I had done the clinical trial first because it failed. That's right, tapping does not work. Now, to be a little more fair about it, it did work on about 5% of the people in that clinical trial, which, let's face it, that's a 95% failure rate. And to me, that is failure. If you're only getting 5%, that you could have that by any number of things. It just isn't strong enough to say, yep, that was it. So I put it up and gave up on it. In 2021, I learned about a new therapy called havening therapy. And it's based in Western science, based in the brain science, all of the stuff that goes on in the brain. So it's not the meridian system. It's not even social science. This is hard brain science with the patterning and the processing of the brain, how thought works, etc. Pretty amazing stuff. So I got real excited, and I dove into the science, and I read and I had to educate myself on a lot of things. As I read, I more and more recognized that this was the answer that I had been looking for literally decades. This was the answer on how to repattern those very deep, permanently patterned pathways in the brain. Exciting. I was just over the moon. So, of course, naturally, this has been a personal quest. I jumped in and applied for and was accepted to the certification process. And man, oh man, I just more and more I learned, the more I was convinced this would work and how excited I was and how wonderful it was. Well, towards the end of that certification process, like with any major certification, you have to do practicum where you actually work in therapy with clients. And at that part of my education, I chose to work with obese people. And I wanted to start applying what I knew about childhood. So I'm bringing this in from a different perspective than all other havening. Havening is always about trauma, and I was bringing it about not trauma, but childhood patterning. Same process in the brain. These are called permanently potentiated neural pathways. We'll get into that a whole bunch in other videos. I started doing the clinical trial while I was still in the certification process, and then wrapped up the certification process and continued with that clinical trial. Now, I began the trial January of 2022. So we have all of 2022, all of 2023. I'm recording this at the end of 2024. So 3 years of clinical trial. And in January of 25, I will complete the last of the weekly therapy sessions. After that, there's 2 more years of follow-up and checking in and the occasional therapy session. So altogether, it's going to be 3 years of active therapy and then follow-up, so the people who started off early will have 5 years of longevity in the program. I got to tell you, the results are extraordinary with healing that compulsive urge, that what I told you earlier is called the food monster, that compulsion to eat when you promise yourself you won't. Promise yourself you won't overeat. You promise yourself, and you promise your friends and your family and your loved ones. And the freedom from that is amazing. You can become free from this food monster that has plagued you for years, if not decades. So that's the background. Let's take a look at where I am today. As I said, I personally suffered from yo-yo overweight and obesity. I was overweight for decades, obese several times, and I'm free. It's over. I did the therapy on myself, and I'm free. It's done for me. It's been a 44-year quest. It's a long time. And one of the results of that is I'm old. I'm in my mid-70s. But I absolutely refuse to retire. I will not quit. That's my promise to you. I will not quit on this quest to finalize this and bring you the information about what really caused your food monster, how that sets you up for a lifetime of this compulsive eating. And I will also bring to you how to solve this underlying root cause of your obesity. That's my promise. If you feel you're getting value from these videos, please subscribe and support the channel's growth. It will help me get this message out to those who need it. And remember, obesity is not your fault. It never has been your fault. And finally, there is a way to cure it.